Lecture covers information needed to plan an effective curriculum. So it's going to walk through what curriculum is, concepts and terminology related to curriculum, different kinds of curricular approaches that you can pursue, and the efficacy of particular kinds of curriculum opportunities for young children. So before we get started on all the things about curriculum, I did just want to kind of think about curriculum in a broader picture. So today we're going to be talking about implementing research-based curriculum and teaching practices, but I do want you to understand that we're building a whole house. So curriculum is just one portion of that house. It's not the whole thing that we need to be offering to children. So we need to attend to parent and family engagement, which we've talked about. We need to focus on how to individualize curriculum, both in terms of diversity and children's individual abilities. We need to think about how to have nurturing, responsive, effective interactions, which we've talked about. And then we also need to make sure that this house that we're building includes screening and ongoing child assessment, which we will be talking about in upcoming lectures. So the first thing that we need to do is just define what curriculum is, and then we're going to go into more specifics related to curriculum, like how curriculum relates to different theoretical approaches about children's learning and development, and what different kinds of curricular approaches there are. But let's just first generally talk about what curriculum means. So curriculum can mean different things to different people. It's not a super exact definition. So one, it can be referring to just specific activities or lessons that are planned. So when you come into the classroom, there's a circle time that's planned, and the teacher plans to put out particular activities for center time, and that could be considered to be the curriculum. It might also be thinking about everything that children are having access to. So the ways that teachers interact with children, the kinds of daily routines that are done, those learning activities that I just talked about a minute ago, what the room environment is like. So everything that children have access to could also be considered to be the curriculum. Oftentimes, though, we're looking at it kind of in between those two things, and that's the definition of curriculum that we'll focus on for this lecture, is a particular approach that guides a program. So it is a way of thinking about how young children learn and what kinds of learning strategies work for them best, and then what kind of teaching strategies we can employ. Remember, we talked about those two things in the last lecture about learning strategies and teaching strategies. So based on children's learning strategies, what teaching strategies can we utilize that best match those learning strategies? So what kinds of activities can we plan? How should we be interacting with children when they're engaging in those activities? So it's kind of in between focusing on everything and only focusing on just specific activities that are planned, but kind of hitting that middle ground, sort of covering a little bit of both of those things, but not quite so minimal and not quite so extensive. So that's the kind of curriculum that we'll be focusing on in this lecture. The decision about what type of curriculum to use typically is associated with what you believe, what kind of theories you subscribe to, how you think children best learn and grow. So when we think about curriculum, I think sometimes we're so busy focusing on the activities or the lessons that are being planned, we forget that most of the time curriculum, or the best curriculum, comes from a theoretical approach. So if you believe that play is super important, that you believe that that's the vehicle through which children learn, you probably come from a constructivist theoretical background or a progressive education theoretical background. If you believe that learning best happens when adults are directly teaching children things, where children are more passive in their learning. It's not so active and hands-on. You probably are emanating from more of a behavioral theoretical approach or from a more direct instruction kind of model approach. So it's really important for us to think about the educational models or the theories that are sitting behind these curriculum choices. So again, if you are making play-based curriculum choices, you probably have a particular theoretical orientation, like I said, more than likely constructivist or progressive education, whereas if you are more comfortable with kind of a traditional elementary school model where the teacher stands up front and delivers instruction to children, you're probably more behavioral or kind of a direct instruction person. So the articles on this page give you more information about each of these educational models or these different theories, but just to know that direct instruction is based off of behaviorism. Constructivism is based off of Piaget's ideas, so children have to construct their own knowledge by hands-on experiences with the environment. And then progressive education is typically attributed to John Dewey. John Dewey thought that children had to have real life experiences where they had at least some measure of control over their learning environment to help them be ready to participate in adult society. So be able to make choices and be self-determined and participate in society effectively. So depending on what kind of resonates with you, that might be why you lean towards particular kinds of curricular approaches because of the educational models or theories that you subscribe to. So as I was just saying, a curricular approach or a particular curriculum way of doing things should be guided by an educational model or a developmental theory. So as we also noted earlier, when we're thinking about curricular approaches or curriculum in this particular class, we're going to be thinking about that as sort of that kind of middle ground, so not everything that happens in the room, but not just the activities. So we're going to consider curriculum or a curriculum approach to be a particular way of implementing activities. So in this case, we're going to be focusing on play-based ways of facilitating activities, certain ways of interacting with children, so thinking about that guided play, that guided discovery kind of stuff. And then that factors into sort of how we're going to approach teaching. So if you're kind of play-based and you're more into that guided experience, you're not going to be doing a lot of direct instruction. It's going to be much more child-initiated kinds of activities. So to further flesh this out about curricular approaches and the ways in which they might vary from one another, I wanted to dive into some of the elements that make curricular approaches different. So one is, what is the role of teachers? Are they directly teaching young children? Are they facilitating? So they're kind of scaffolding or helping learning, but they're not directly instructing children, or are they just completely hands-off? They're not doing a whole lot of anything. How are children participating? Are they only participating in activities that are completely led and devised by the adults in the room? Or are they getting to choose activities, choose who they want to play with, choose the ways in which they might use materials that are offered to them? That's an important consideration. What's the classroom structure? Are adults kind of following a completely adult-led schedule? They're told where to sit, they're told what activities to be doing at a particular time, they're told how long to stay there, they're told what to do with the materials when they get there, or is it more free-flowing? Do they get to move about the classroom sort of at will? Do they get to choose their own activities and who they'd like to participate in them with, how much time they would like to spend, what they would like to do with those materials when they're there? And then what is the curriculum focus? Does it focus on a particular developmental domain? Some curriculum are completely focused on fleshing out children's dramatic play opportunities, or a curriculum might focus heavily on literacy or moral development, or it may be an arts-based curriculum. Are we trying to get a particular life skill? So I was saying earlier that John Dewey, with his progressive education, was very interested in social studies because he wanted children to gain the skills that they would need to participate in a democracy when they grew up, so that they were ready for that particular life skill. So a lot of times curricular approaches get boiled down to two basic types. So a lot of times you'll see comparisons between curricular approaches that are more play-based in nature and then curricular approaches that are more academic or direct instruction in nature. And so I did want to provide this little graphic for you so that you can see how these two kind of broader approaches might vary on some of the things that we were just talking about. So play-based programs tend to be focused on building leadership and social skills. Academics are built into play experiences. They're not separated out. Teachers are facilitated. It's child-led or child-centric, whereas academic programs, they tend to be more teacher-centric. There's more of a focus on finding the right answer rather than just sort of the process of learning. They encourage following the teacher's lead. There's a heavy focus on those traditional school academic subjects of reading, writing, and math. I would love to say that it doesn't matter which theory or educational model or curricular approach that you subscribe to, but honestly it does. So when we're thinking about young children, there have been shown to be better outcomes when curricular approaches are more play-based in nature. So programs that utilize child-initiated learning, where teachers are doing facilitation rather than direct instruction, tend to have better outcomes. So when we think about academics, developmentally appropriate programs that are play-based in nature, they are associated actually with increased academic functioning. I think sometimes people think, oh, if I'm directly instructing, these reading, writing, and math things, that children will do better academically, but that doesn't actually seem to be the case. Children in play-based programs do as well or better in terms of academics. We have higher cognitive functioning when children are going to play-based programs, which are considered to be more developmentally appropriate. They have better school liking, they have better motivation, and then those didactic or direct instruction, behavioral kinds of programs for young children, unfortunately, they're not associated with increased academics, and they are associated with more school stress, greater levels of grade retention, higher levels of misconduct, and higher levels of emotional disturbance. So on this page, you can take a look at an example of a play-based or a developmentally appropriate program, and then you can also click on the other link to see an example of a didactic or a direct instruction program. So based on what we just learned about what kind of curricular approach works best for young children, thinking about something that's more play-based, child-centered, let's talk about four things that developmentally appropriate curricula, which is the plural of curriculum, so things that DAP curricula should involve or should be. And we're going to talk about these on the upcoming slides. So first of all, developmentally appropriate curricula should be integrated, they should be emergent, they should be responsive, and they should be meaningful. I'm going to talk about each one of these categories of terminology on the next slides. So let's first talk about integrated. An integrated curriculum is when we take everything that children need to learn and do, and we create opportunities that allow children to get all of those things without having to learn each one in a separate time block or through a separate activity. So here's the things that children need to get out of the day. They need to get all of their developmental selves met and addressed. So we need to address children's social learning, their emotional learning, their cognitive learning, their language learning, their physical learning, their creative learning. That would be all the various developmental domains. They need to be addressed in your curriculum. We also need to address, in a developmentally appropriate, different academic disciplines. So we need to attend to children's language and literacy. We need to attend to their numeracy skills or their number skills. We need to attend to their social science skills, which would be learning about people, themselves, interactions with each other, how to resolve conflict. We need to address their scientific selves, so learning more about the biological world, the physical world, space and science world, technology, all of those different things. We need to address their art selves, so that also goes along with the developmental domain of creativity, but we need to address the performing arts and the visual arts. We need to address physical education, which is also physical development, but we need to make sure that when we're doing this, we're not being like elementary school. Early childhood, and again, early childhood is meant to cover infancy through 8 years old or grade 3. So I think you're going to see when I'm talking that we oftentimes are doing grades kindergarten 1, 2, and 3 in not necessarily very developmentally appropriate ways. So the idea here is not to have a separate time for literacy and a separate time for math and for science and a separate time for art and a separate time for PE, but to think about how we can create activities and opportunities that cut across all these different developmental domains and academic disciplines so that when children are learning, they have the opportunity to learn everything kind of in context with each other. So if we're reading a book and it's a book about science, and then we make predictions, and then we graph our predictions, I've managed to incorporate language, literacy, science, math, all into one book reading activity. I didn't need to separate it into different activities throughout the day or different time blocks because I'm getting at everything I need to in a more integrated way. That's the way most of us learn, and that's definitely the way that young children learn. So we'll talk a little bit more about integrated on the next slide. So I just wanted to show you that there are curricular approaches that are more or less integrated. So you can see on this graph that things that include less child initiation and decision making tend to be down at the left, and models of curriculum that are more integrated, that include more child initiation and decision making, tend to be over on the right. So things that are over on the left typically are determined by the teacher, and the teacher is focusing on a single skill or concept. That's what I was just talking about, where when you have math time and you're only allowed to do math, and math doesn't cut across with art or literacy or social studies or science or anything else. It's math time and we focus just on math. That would be very much a single concept kind of idea. And then as we move across the graph to the right, we can see that the end one is projects. So we're actually going to talk about a curriculum later on in the lecture called the project approach. That's what's actually being referred to when they say projects on this graph. Projects are when you listen to the questions that children have, and then you help them to answer those questions. So you plan activities that involve all the developmental domains and all the academic disciplines in an effort to help children answer a particular question. So maybe children want to know about clothing, and they want to know, where does the fabric come from that makes their clothes? So maybe you help them to answer that by teaching them about sheep and how we gather wool, and then what do we do with the wool after we've gathered it? Or maybe you show them cotton plants and you show them how cotton from plants can be translated into clothing. As I'm doing that, I can read books, I can talk with children, I can have them engage in sensory activities, I can show them about farming, which is, getting into more science about how the things grow, and then what do we do to turn a plant or animal fur into different kinds of fabric. So in answering their questions, I'm integrating all of these different subjects and developmental domains, while also allowing children a lot of opportunity to make decisions and take initiative in their learning. So as much as possible, we want to be integrated, and we want to try and hang out kind of in the right-hand side of this graph, rather than in dictating everything and having these single subjects that don't really have a lot of meaning or relevance to what children want to learn about. So next up, let's talk about emergent. So curriculum should emerge from primarily the children themselves. And by emerging from the children themselves, I mean it should emerge from what they want to learn about, what they're capable of learning about. So those are the two primary things. What do children want to learn about, and what are they capable of learning about? So the graphic on the right kind of gets at these kinds of things. So it talks about the concepts that children are interested in and want to learn. That would be conceptual organizers. It talks about basing our curriculum on what we know about children's growth and development. That would be resting on our child development knowledge. We also need to remember that it's a continuum, that not all children are at the same place on the continuum. We want to be paying attention to those developmental domains and those academic disciplines. That would be the content of the disciplines down at the bottom. So we really mostly want to pay attention to what do children want to know about, and what are they capable of doing. And that includes those learning strategies that we talked about previously. Now, sometimes you may bring in something that you think would be of interest to the children that you have particular expertise in. That's okay every now and then to bring in something that is exciting to you, that you think would match children's interests and capabilities. Sometimes things just come up. That's called serendipity. You're outside and lizards are running across the wall and children start asking questions about them, and that's not what you planned to do today, but okay, we'll run with it because that seems interesting and engaging to the children. The other piece here that I want to mention is called learning standards. So learning standards are written documents that should be tied to children's developmental milestones, or what we know about how young children learn, and they are a document that you can refer to that helps you to think about what kinds of things we should be working on with young children as we create activities and experiences. So if they're based on developmental milestones, they're based on what children are able to do and know, then it's reasonable for us to plan activities that match what we know that children can typically do and know at a particular age. So in the next couple slides, we're going to dive in a little bit more to how do we find out about children's interests and capabilities. That's the next slide. And then the slide after that, we're going to talk about learning standards a little bit more and how they contribute to an emergent curriculum. So prior to determining what your emergent curriculum is going to look like, or what topics you might focus on, it is helpful to take stock of what children would like to know about. So two things that you can do is you can use webbing, and you can also use KWHL charts. So K stands for what you know, W stands for what you would like to know, H stands for how you're going to know what you want to know, and L stands for what you have learned. So you can see that the KWHL chart that I've provided on the left is missing the H, but that's okay. But the basic idea here is that ask children, ask them, what do you know about this already? What would you like to know about this thing? And then once you're done with the knowing, ask what was learned. And then that will help you to think about what else they would like to learn in the future. Also, webbing is another way to do this. So if children have a topic that they seem interested in, you can ask them to tell everything they know about that topic. And you can also ask them what they would like to know You can color code the web so that you can see sort of what is known, what they would like to know, and then start adding in some potential activities for getting to know that. But it's very important to actually take the time to ask children, and I think you'll be very surprised with how thoughtful their responses are and how excited and engaged they are about the world around them. So that is one of the best places to start your curriculum activities with, is just children and finding out what they would like to know more about the world around them. So the other source of emergent curriculum that we talked about a couple slides ago was using learning standards. So learning standards, again, are taken from developmental milestones, or they should be. So it should be thoughtfully using what we know that young children generally can do at particular ages. It's not going to account for all the individual or cultural diversity that is in the world, but gives you kind of an idea of where children at age 2 or age 5 or age 8 might be at in terms of their development. And that allows you to focus your curriculum on those things that are appropriate for those ages. So as NAAYC notes, learning standards are expectations for the learning and development of young children. If I know that young children can typically do this, then I can plan activities that expect them to utilize those particular skills, or to engage in activities that help them to work on those particular skills, because they are things that children can and should be learning and doing at that particular age. So in the state of California, we have 2 documents that are relevant to the age group of children that we're talking about in this class. Well, there's actually 3. There is an infant toddler one. I will admit I did leave that one off, but we'll focus on the 2 older age groups that are relevant to this class. So the state of California has developed standards. Sometimes when we're referring to standards in early childhood, we call them early learning guidelines. But the state of California has developed standards or early learning guidelines for the early childhood period, preschool and transitional kindergarten, and for school-age children. So the standards for younger children are called the California Preschool Transitional Kindergarten Learning Foundations. So they cover children ages 3, 4, and 5. And the California Common Core Standards, they cover kindergarten through grade 12, but we're only going to focus on kindergarten through grade 3 for this class. So I have posted links to both of those websites so that you can see what those California standards are that teachers in publicly funded programs are expected to pay attention to. So you can take a look at those on Canvas. So we have talked about that curriculum should be integrated and it should be emergent. Let's now talk about the fact that it should be responsive. So a responsive curriculum does those things that we've already talked about. It is related to being developmentally appropriate and paying attention to children's age, paying attention to children's individuality, and paying attention to children's cultural diversity. So we've already really touched on age. We've talked about the fact that there are learning standards, that there are different learning standards for different age children, and that we should not be expecting children at one age to be able to navigate and meet the learning standards or expectations of children who are older, nor do we need to go backwards and have them doing things that maybe are too simplistic or are below their age level. So we always want to be thinking about how can we factor age into the curriculum that we plan, the activities and experiences that we offer to children. We also want to make sure that we are being culturally relevant. Is the curriculum that we are using, does it meet the learning needs of all children, or does it only meet the learning needs of some children? So sometimes theory and curriculum are accused of only paying attention to the learning needs of middle income Caucasian children and maybe not considering the learning needs of children in other groups. So a response to this can be being responsive and adapting the curriculum that you offer to make sure that it's relevant for all children. It could also be something like the book here on the right, where you are developing curriculum specifically for a particular group of children. So you can see here, this is an example of a curriculum that was developed for American Indian children to be culturally responsive and make sure that the curriculum being offered to the children is a good fit for their potential diverse needs. Finally, we also want to make sure that curriculum, in being developmentally appropriate, is individually appropriate, that we make adaptations where adaptations are needed. So if we notice that a curriculum is not working for a particular child, we need to think about what can I do to adapt that activity, to adapt that experience, to adapt the way that I'm interacting with that particular child, to make sure that all children are able to have their needs met. So I did just want to offer or also mention that a responsive curriculum does a couple other things. One, it's based on observation and reflection, or collecting data and assessment, which we'll be talking about later. But the last little piece of this is that when we're planning curriculum and we're planning activities and experiences and schedules for young children, we want them to do two things. We want them to be predictable so that children have a general sense of expectation when they come to their classrooms that this is how my classroom operates and functions, and I can depend on it operating and functioning in, mostly the same way every day when I come, but also the recognition that we need to be flexible. If something isn't working, it's okay to change it up. And if the schedule for the day gets off track, okay, the schedule got off track and we'll just continue moving forward and not get too worried about it. So we don't want to be so predictable that we become rigid and we can't adapt to children's needs when it is appropriate. So we do want to make sure that we are predictable enough to create a sense of safety, but flexible enough to create a sense of caring. That is another way to implement a responsive curriculum. So the final point for this section is that curriculum should also be meaningful. So it should be play-based, it should be child-initiated, it should be emergent and integrated and responsive and meaningful. So it's really important to think about planning activities and experiences for young children that center on them and center on their own experiences and center on things that make sense to them, that are important to them, that are relevant to them. So you notice I have two pictures up here, two very different ways of thinking about creative or art experiences. So the picture on the left is probably very meaningful to that child. It is a picture of them, likely created by them, using colors that they enjoy, emphasizing portions of the picture that make sense to them, that are things that they wanted to include in their picture. It has their name on it. It has flowers, which they probably like flowers. Maybe they own red shoes and it looks like they maybe have blonde hair. So this picture is about this child personally, whereas the picture on the right is kind of uniform. It's clearly something that was initiated by the adult. Children may not have any interest in creating turkeys. It's more of an exercise in, can you cut along the lines? Can you exercise fine motor skills to trace your own fingers? Can you follow the teacher's model and put the little feathers on the same kind of place that the teacher did? And you can see that children had varying degrees of success with this, so that I can put them all up and make a cute bulletin board at Thanksgiving time with turkeys on it. So I just want you to really be thoughtful about the experiences that you're providing, and do they meet a need for you, or do they meet a need for the children? And are they based on something that the children wanted to explore or know more about, or is it something that you wanted to explore and know more about? So always be thinking about, is what I'm doing meaningful to me, or is it meaningful to the children? And if it's meaningful to me, why am I not doing something that's more meaningful to the kids themselves? So the next few slides have examples of different curricular approaches. So we talked about curriculum and what curriculum is, and then we talked about curriculum models or theories that are associated with different kinds of curricula. And we talked about how curriculum should be implemented in a particular kind of way, play-based, integrated, all those things. So now I want to segue over to talking about curricular approaches. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts of what you actually do with young children. So a curricular approach takes all those things we've been talking about. It takes those theories or those curriculum models. It takes the idea of being play-based or more teacher-directed. It takes the idea of being integrated or single subject and being emergent or not, and being meaningful or not, and being responsive or not, or being responsive in particular kinds of ways, and thinks about, okay, depending on where we fall on all those different parameters, theory, models, different aspects of curriculum, what should the actual curriculum look like? What should we do on the daily? What kinds of activities should be planned? What should the teacher be doing when those activities are happening? And so when we determine what all of those things are going to look like in a very specific kind of way, that's when we can say, okay, this curriculum that does things this way is a particular kind of approach. So in the next few slides, there's going to be examples of different curriculum approaches who have different ways of incorporating theory, that have different ways of incorporating what children are doing versus what adults are doing, that have different ways of navigating whether they are integrated or not, whether they are responsive or not. And so I'm not going to be explaining each of these curriculum approaches to you. There is a document on Canvas in your modules that you can look at for information about what these particular curricular approaches are. Your textbook has information about different curricular approaches. And I've also given you a lot of different things to read on the next few slides and videos to watch so that you can personally learn about these different curricular approaches and sort of the nuances and how they differ in those things that we've been talking about on the previous slides. So if you notice for this lecture, there's not quite as many slides as there normally are because there's a lot more sort of clicking on links that you should be doing so that you can learn more about these different curricular approaches. So now that you've had a chance to look at the different kind of curricular approaches there are, and again, remember, please use the last few slides, the links that I've provided on them, the additional web link that I've provided in your modules, the information that's in your textbook. There's a lot of information about all the different kinds of curricula. So Bank Street, Reggio Emilia, Creative Curriculum, High Scope, the project approach, all different kinds of ways about thinking about how curriculum should be navigated with young children. But I did want to kind of add in some additional terminology. So your book does use terms related to curriculum that I think are important for you to know. So this slide has a list of things that are curriculum terms and considerations that we haven't talked about so far in this lecture. So one is a curriculum framework. A curriculum framework is basically choosing a curriculum. So many Head Starts in our area use High Scope. So they have chosen that as their curriculum framework. So they have taken the High Scope approach and adopted it for use in their programs, and that is the curriculum framework that they follow. when you were doing your program comparison assignment, and if you called a center and they said, hey, we use creative curriculum, that is their curriculum framework. That is the curriculum that they have chosen that guides the work that they do with young children at their center. So they are not a creative curriculum center. They are a center that uses a creative curriculum approach as their curriculum framework. So hopefully that distinction makes sense. Oh, some of the curriculum that we talked about are validated. It means that there is research that has been done on them. So when I was sharing with you earlier data about why play-based programs are better and that they seem to have more positive outcomes for children, that is based on studies that examined curriculum. So that is primarily based on studies that have compared direct instruction programs to the high scope curriculum and have found high scope to be advantageous for young children. So a validated curriculum is one in which people have gone and done research, and then they have research to show that that particular curriculum seems to work for young children. Another one is tools of the mind that is mentioned in your textbook. So I would encourage you to look at that. But it's a good idea when you're choosing curriculum to look and see if any research has been done and what does that research say before you adopt it and decide to use it in your center with young children. Now, sometimes those validated curricula are published. It means that somebody said, hey, we have created this and we're going to publish it, and if you want to use it, you have to pay for it. Now, just because something is published doesn't mean that it's validated. People can publish things and they haven't been validated by anyone, or they've been validated poorly. And that's why I'm saying it's really important to look and do your homework and make sure that the curriculum that you're using is not just published, because that actually is not a marker of quality, that it's validated. So I know that a lot of the local transitional kindergarteners in our area are using a published curriculum by Scholastic. I'm going to tell you that anybody who's in the early childhood world and not the K through 12 world is not going to be using Scholastic early childhood curriculum. We're going to be using the creative curriculum or high scope or something that's based on developmentally appropriate practice and has been validated on young children. So be careful. I'm not saying published curriculum is bad, but I'm saying that you need to do your work and you need to vet it and make sure that it really is a good high quality curriculum to be using with young children. Now, some of those published curriculum go a step further, and they actually tell you exactly what to do at every step. So a prescribed curriculum not only tells you what your schedule should look like and what activities you should use and what books you should read, it also tells you what to say. So when you are teaching, it gives you a script, and the expectation is that you will follow that script. Open Court is an example of this kind of prescribed curriculum. So I want you to think back to talking about being responsive. So if you're using a prescribed curriculum that tells you exactly what to teach, when, and how to teach it, it's likely that you cannot adapt that curriculum for individual children or for diverse children. So is it really meeting that goal of being responsive, which we know is important in curriculum? And then finally, I want to mention that sometimes curriculum includes opportunities for assessment. So they give you suggestions about how to assess or observe the children who are using that curriculum so that you can collect data and see how it's working and see if there's any accommodations that you need to make. So again, we will be talking about assessment and observation in an upcoming lecture, but just know that as that's an important tool, remember I showed you that very first slide of building that house, and that part of building that house is thinking about observation and assessment and reflecting on your practices. It's not a bad idea to pick a curriculum that is both validated and meets all the stipulations that we set out for what good early childhood curriculum is, if it also includes embedded assessment as well, then that's a good curriculum to think about choosing. So I did want to try and kind of give some sort of summary about everything that we've talked about. And your textbook has a nice table in it. So I pulled this from the textbook that kind of summarizes all of these various things that we talked about, that if you're thinking about curriculum, sort of what are all the different elements that it should have. So you can see that it talks about responsive teaching, which we talked about. It talks about if it's research-based, does it have positive effects on child outcomes? Is it based on our knowledge of child development? So many of the things that we were talking about are included in this chart, but I think it's kind of a nice summary of the things that we've talked about up until this point in this lecture. I just wanted to end with one more point. So in your textbook, it talks about the notion of fidelity. And so the idea here is that, let's say that your center decides that it's going to be a high scope center, or it's going to be a creative curriculum center. So this center has decided that they're going to adopt that particular curricular approach as their curriculum framework, and that they'd like their teachers to use that particular curriculum and all of the different things that it outlines. So when you adopt curriculum and when it's being implemented in classrooms, you need to determine, do you expect teachers, so let's pretend you're a director, do you expect your teachers to follow that curriculum exactly without making any adaptations to it or making minimal adaptations to it? That is called fidelity. So when you implement something exactly as it was laid out, you are having fidelity to that particular curricular approach. So if you were using a prescribed curriculum where it tells you exactly what to do, there would be an expectation that you use that curriculum with fidelity, that you do it in the way that it was intended. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Most teachers do not have strict fidelity to any curriculum because teachers tend to be responsive. They tend to think about children's ages. They think about the development of individual children and what their needs are. They think about diverse groups of children coming to them and what the needs of those diverse children might be. And so they tend to adapt things. So fidelity is not always exact, and that's probably okay. The other thing that I think it's important to consider is that a lot of teachers use sort of a combination of different approaches. They might believe in various theories. Maybe they believe in the progressive theories, and they also believe in a little bit of behaviorism, and they believe in a little bit of constructivism, and so they don't want to choose one curricular approach that seems to lean more heavily to one theory or curriculum model than another one. So they kind of pull bits and pieces, or they like this from creative curriculum, and they like this from high scope, and they like this from Montessori. And so they're kind of taking little bits of different things. That's called being eclectic. And a lot of early childhood folks, a lot of educators tend to be eclectic and sort of pull different things from different places. Now, again, it depends on how important fidelity is to your boss. Maybe your school is part of a research study and fidelity is important because you're assessing the effects of a particular kind of curriculum. So it's important to find out wherever you are working, whether it is important to have fidelity to the curriculum framework that has been chosen for your school, or whether eclecticism is welcomed and allowed.